The 6 dangerous people Carl Jung insists you should never help. There's a truth most people refuse to face. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to step in. Jung spent decades tracking a troubling pattern in human behavior. He found that helping certain personality types doesn't heal them at all. It enables their dysfunction, blocks their psychological growth, and quietly drains your energy. Jung referred to these people as carriers of the unlived life. And today you'll learn exactly who they are. But here's what makes this discovery so unsettling. These aren't the obviously toxic individuals. They're often the ones who look the most helpless, the most deserving, the most worthy of your sacrifice. And that's exactly why they're so dangerous to your mental well-being. Jung identified 6 types of people for whom traditional help completely backfires. Withdrawing your energy from them isn't cruelty. It's the only sane path for both sides. So let me ask you something. Are you a rescuer? Do you constantly save people who have no real intention of changing? If that feels familiar, you need to grasp something crucial about the human psyche that Jung spent his life studying. Let's begin with the first type. Jung described patients whose shadow wasn't aggression or violence. Their shadow was something far more subtle. Pure inertia. These people were so fused with their unlived life that they became psychological black holes. Every bit of energy you invested vanished. Jung called this the identification with stagnation. And it's far more common than most realize. Here's how you spot them. They're not just tired or passing through a rough moment. They've built a whole identity around non-action. They use philosophical grandiosity to justify total paralysis. They talk about waiting for the perfect moment, about needing inspiration, about honoring their inner rhythms. But Jung saw through this instantly. This wasn't wisdom. It was fear disguised as spirituality. The chronically inactive person Jung described showed one consistent pattern. They could explain exactly what needed to be done with perfect clarity. They understood their issues, recognized the solutions, even admitted the consequences of doing nothing, yet they remained still. And here's the critical insight Jung uncovered. Your help doesn't spark momentum in these people. It removes the necessary inner tension that would force them to act. Every time you rescue them from the fallout of their own inaction, you freeze their development even further. Jung witnessed this repeatedly. The parent endlessly paying rent for an adult child who refuses to work. The partner who handles every responsibility while the other drifts through endless self-searching. The friend providing constant emotional support to someone who never changes a thing. These helpers believed they were being loving. Jung realized they were being used as psychological crutches blocking growth. The chronically lethargic need to feel the full weight of their choices. They must encounter the real consequences of long-term inaction. Your intervention postpones the crisis they require. Jung wrote that some people grow only through what he called productive suffering. Remove that suffering through misguided compassion and you erase their only catalyst for change. Jung recorded one revealing case in his private notes. A 28-year-old man whose family supported him for a decade as he claimed to be writing a novel. He had genuine talent, could discuss literature with depth, and always seemed on the verge of a breakthrough. But the novel never appeared. With financial support cushioning him, he never had to confront the truth that his artistic ambitions were simply a shield for complete life avoidance. It wasn't until his father finally stopped enabling him that he faced his pattern. Within 6 months, he had stable work. Within a year, he produced more writing than in the previous 10 years. The help had been the obstacle. Here's what happens when you finally stop assisting the chronically stagnant. They'll try to guilt-trip you. They'll call your boundary cruelty, abandonment, proof that you never cared. They'll go searching for someone else to enable them. But occasionally, rarely, some will finally face the inner tension they've been dodging. And that's when real growth begins. Your role isn't to witness that moment. Your role is to stop blocking its arrival. But the chronically inert aren't the most dangerous group Jung identified. That title belongs to someone far more destructive. Jung spent years documenting what he called the compulsion to repeat. These individuals recreated the same painful situations again and again while sincerely believing they were victims of terrible luck. The people involved changed, but the storyline stayed identical. They were always betrayed, always abandoned, always exploited by those they trusted. Here's what made these cases so disturbing to Jung. These people weren't consciously choosing their patterns. They were unconsciously selecting and attracting individuals who would play specific roles in their internal drama. The betrayer, the abandoner, the narcissist, the commitment phobe. And they did this with uncanny precision. Jung noted something extraordinary about those caught in repetition compulsion. They had an unconscious radar for exactly the wrong people. Put them in a room with 99 healthy individuals and one person capable of recreating their trauma, and they gravitate straight toward that single person. This wasn't bad luck. It was unconscious psychological design. So how does this radar function? Jung found that repetition compulsion individuals send out subtle signals that healthy people instinctively avoid while wounded people instinctively recognize. They broadcast their unresolved pain in ways that draw in predators and push away protectors. They ask questions designed to identify who will hurt them in ways that feel familiar. They test boundaries specifically to locate the people who will reliably violate them. It's not that they consciously seek suffering. It's that they're unconsciously more at ease with the pain they already understand than with the discomfort of unfamiliar growth. But here's where things become truly dangerous for helpers. When you attempt to rescue someone caught in a repetition cycle, you're not freeing them from their pattern. You're becoming a character in their internal script, typically the savior who will eventually be recast as yet another villain in their ongoing personal tragedy. Jung witnessed this shift countless times. The helper begins with sincere compassion. The repetition addict appears thankful, even seems to be improving. Then the switch happens. The addict unconsciously needs you to betray them to complete their narrative. So they start subtly provoking, misreading, and pressuring you until you either snap or exhaust yourself and pull away. Either way, you become the newest proof in their collection of hurts. Your support becomes ammunition in their argument against humanity. Listen to how they reinterpret your help once the pattern demands that you turn into the villain. You set a boundary to protect yourself. They insist you abandon them during their darkest moment. You voice concern about their choices. They accuse you of being controlling and judgmental, just like everyone else. You step back so they can face consequences. They tell others you were never truly there for them. The script was written long before you entered their life. You're simply filling a role predetermined by their unresolved trauma. Jung's guidance for dealing with repetition compulsion was extreme but necessary. Don't step onto their stage. Don't accept any role in their drama. The only safe move is complete non-participation. These individuals can only break their cycle through structured therapeutic work combined with a genuine willingness to examine their part in recreating past wounds. Your empathy cannot substitute for this process. Therapy succeeds where friendship collapses because the therapist operates within strict boundaries that prevent them from being absorbed into the client's pattern. A therapist doesn't rescue, doesn't get entangled emotionally, and doesn't take responsibility for the client's life decisions. This structure is what finally makes the pattern visible to the person trapped inside it. The third type Jung identified frightened him more than any other, not because they were obviously threatening, but because they were disguised with unsettling perfection. These were the persona-fused perfectionists, people who poured all their psychological energy into maintaining a flawless external appearance while their true self suffocated beneath it. Jung recognized that everyone relies on a persona. It's the social mask required to navigate collective life. But these individuals made a fatal mistake. They confused the mask with who they actually were. They became the performance and lost touch with the performer. This creates what Jung called the perfect person problem. An individual so shaped by external expectations that they've severed all connection to their authentic self and shadow. Here's how you spot them. Their social presence is eerily flawless. They always offer the right words, the expected emotions, the correct reactions. Yet something feels strangely empty around them. Their interactions feel manufactured despite being technically impeccable. They never appear to have bad days, inappropriate moods, or human inconsistencies. Observe them closely and you'll notice the performance quality Jung described. Their expressions land a fraction of a second late, as though they're selecting the proper reaction instead of naturally feeling it. They mirror your energy with unsettling precision, becoming whatever each social moment requires. Their language sounds deep but reveals nothing real. Conversations feel oddly draining even though they seem polite and pleasant, because you're interacting with an engineered persona, not a living person. Their homes, their social media, their whole existence are curated like magazine layouts of perfection. But Jung warned about what lies behind that flawless facade. A terrifying void. These people have rejected so many parts of themselves in their pursuit of ideal presentation that their authentic self is barely present at all. And everything they've denied builds up in the unconscious, gaining pressure. Here's what Jung discovered that will save you years of frustration. Your help is always perceived as an attack on their perfect image. You cannot help someone who has no conscious contact with their real problems because acknowledging issues would fracture the persona they've invested their lives into. When you try to help them, they don't hear compassion. They hear exposure. They interpret your concern as evidence that you've detected the cracks in their mask. This is why persona-identified perfectionists cannot be helped. Your attempts trigger defensive reactions far more intense than the issue itself. They'd rather cling to the illusion of flawlessness than accept support that implies imperfection exists. Jung noticed that these individuals surround themselves with those who reinforce the mask. Family praising their stability, friends admiring their composure, communities celebrating their immaculate performance of social norms. Anyone who questions the image gets quietly removed. And here's the truly alarming part Jung observed. The more perfect the persona, the more catastrophic the eventual shadow eruption. All the rejected parts of the psyche don't vanish. They gather in the unconscious like pressure in a sealed container. Eventually, that pressure must burst. The flawless parent suddenly collapses and abandons their responsibilities. The exemplary employee commits fraud. The spiritual guide becomes embroiled in scandal or exploitation. The devoted spouse engages in an affair that destroys the life they curated. Jung recorded these eruptions again and again. The more immaculate the persona, the more devastating the collapse. He noted that persona-fused individuals often experience their shadow breakout as if it happened to someone else, as if they were possessed by a force foreign to their identity. In a sense, they were, because they had denied those parts of themselves so completely that when the elements finally surfaced, they returned with overwhelming intensity. What happens to relationships during those eruptions? Jung found that those closest to persona perfectionists are usually blindsided. They had no clue anything was amiss because the performance was so convincing. The breakdown appears sudden. Yet Jung knew it had been building for years, even decades. Each moment of inauthenticity added another brick to the pressure chamber. Your role is not to fix these people. You can't. Only they can decide to remove the mask and face the inner contents, and most will cling to the persona until it finally consumes them. The compassionate response is to stop validating the mask with praise or enabling concern. Refuse to play along. That's the only genuine help possible. Expect, however, that they'll likely cut you out for declining to applaud their act. But beyond persona fusion, there's a fourth, even more dangerous type: the unconscious shadow projector. Understanding them can save your reputation, relationships, and sanity. These people cast their unlived life and denied darkness onto others with absolute certainty. They don't merely misperceive, they manufacture alternate realities that feel utterly real to them and then become convincing to others. Jung called this the most dangerous psychological pattern he observed in apparently normal people. How does shadow projection work? Everything the projector cannot accept in themselves is unconsciously expelled and seen in you instead. If they cannot tolerate their own selfishness, they will insist you are selfish with remarkable conviction. If they've denied their manipulative tendencies, they'll be certain you're manipulating them. The deeper their denial, the stronger their projection. What makes this especially frightening is their total conviction. They aren't lying. They truly perceive you as holding qualities that primarily exist in their own unconscious, and they will assemble evidence to confirm that perception while remaining blind to contradictions. Jung saw projectors rewrite history, reinterpret neutral acts, and recruit others into their distorted story with destructive effectiveness. He described it as a reality distortion field. The projector doesn't simply mis-see you, they persuade others to view you through their warped lens. How does that happen? The projector's absolute certainty puts psychological pressure on observers. When someone repeatedly accuses you of secret motives with intense emotion and unwavering certainty, others begin to wonder if there's truth to it. The projector seems so sure, so affected. Maybe they're perceiving something real. This dynamic explains how families turn on scapegoats, workplaces mob innocent employees, and communities destroy people on baseless charges. In truth, the projector becomes the storm's eye while everyone else gets caught in the distortion. Jung documented a stark example. A patient convinced her sister was stealing from the family and manipulating their elderly mother. She cited dozens of incidents as proof. The sister's kindness became manipulation, generosity became guilt, concern became control. The patient rallied relatives until the sister was essentially exiled. Years later, after intensive therapy, the patient saw with horror that the traits she described to her sister were actually her own denied shadow. She had been the manipulator all along, yet she had destroyed her sister's place in the family through projection. Your help cannot penetrate the projection field. When you try to correct their false narrative, they interpret your rebuttal as proof of the very qualities they're projecting. Your denial of manipulation becomes evidence of manipulation. Your explanation of motives is twisted into proof of deceit. Facts turn into lies, vulnerability into strategy. There's no winning inside a projection field. Jung's prescription was uncompromising. Withdraw immediately. Don't attempt to persuade, defend, or disprove. Shadow projectors are impervious to contradictory evidence. Whatever you present will be absorbed and reinterpreted to support their story. The only safe course is strategic withdrawal before they recruit others into the delusion. And Jung's chilling final observation. Projectors often successfully enlist what he called the collective, the flying monkeys, who accept and enforce the projector's narrative. These secondary players haven't witnessed the alleged faults themselves, but the projector's conviction and emotional display convince them to take sides. Suddenly, you aren't facing one distorted mind, but an entire system built around a falsehood. Jung's extraction protocol has stages. First, recognize projection rather than legitimate conflict. Second, document everything for your own sanity because they will rewrite history. Third, stop defending yourself to the projector. Fourth, maintain your reality among people outside the field. Fifth, withdraw completely if possible. Sixth, accept that you cannot fix this with reason, evidence, or compassion. The projector must do their own shadow work. You cannot do it for them. But here's what Jung found most disturbing. Shadow projectors don't merely damage individual relationships. They contaminate entire social systems. Families reorganize around their projections. Workplaces gang up on innocent employees. Communities can dismantle people's lives based on accusations rooted entirely in projection. The projector becomes the center of a psychological storm, unconsciously pulling others into attacking the very traits they cannot accept in themselves. Your task is to leave the storm, not convince the projector they're generating whether that doesn't exist outside their mind. The fifth dangerous type merges all earlier patterns with one more factor that makes them nearly impossible to assist: ego-inflation. These individuals haven't simply expelled their shadow outward. They've fused with archetypal forces far beyond what their psyche can contain. They become overtaken by the savior, the prophet, the judge, or the enlightened one. Jung called this archetypal identification and saw it as one of the most hazardous psychological states in seemingly normal people. What does archetypal identification really mean? Jung recognized that archetypes are transpersonal patterns existing in the collective unconscious: the wise old man, the great mother, the hero, the trickster. These energies are vastly larger than any personal ego. In healthy functioning, we can draw on these patterns temporarily without confusing them with who we are. We can speak from the wise old man position and then return to being an ordinary person. We can embody the great mother briefly and then return to being someone with needs and limits. But inflated individuals lose this boundary. They merge their small ego with enormous archetypal force. They don't just access the prophet archetype to deliver insight, they become the prophet. They don't occasionally adopt the healer role. They see themselves as the healer. Their identity is overtaken by the archetype, leaving them possessed by something far too powerful to integrate. Jung noted that inflated individuals appear spiritually advanced, morally elevated, or intellectually awakened. This seeming superiority makes them far more dangerous than obvious narcissists because others willingly submit to their authority. Followers don't realize they're dealing with someone whose ego has merged with contents too vast for them to manage. Here are the warning signs Jung described thoroughly. They never question their own motives while remaining entirely blind to their shadow. Ask them about flaws and they respond with spiritual cliches about growth or learning, yet show no real doubt, no genuine introspection, no authentic uncertainty about whether their actions match their values. They've moved past such concerns because they identify with the archetype's certainty. They interpret disagreement as resistance to truth rather than meaningful feedback. If you challenge them, you're not offering another viewpoint. You're resisting truth, stuck in ego, unprepared for their insight, threatened by their light. They can't process disagreement as legitimate because they're not speaking as individuals. They're channeling archetypal truth. They have intense charisma paired with rigid thinking. The archetype they're fused with gives them magnetic presence. People feel drawn to them, impressed by them, transformed by them. But beneath the charisma lies total psychological rigidity. There is only one correct way, their way. Because to them, it isn't their way, it's the way. Jung recorded various forms of inflation. The savior-inflated believe they must rescue everyone, that others can't survive without them, that only they know the path to salvation. The guru-inflated see themselves as awakened guides meant to enlighten the masses. The judge-inflated view themselves as moral arbiters appointed to expose wrongdoing and punish evil. Each type is convinced of a special mission while completely unaware of the harm caused by their inflation. What happens to those who follow them? Jung described a disturbing pattern. Followers of inflated people often shrink psychologically over time. They begin doubting their own perceptions, deferring to the inflated one's judgment, shaping their lives around supporting the inflated person's mission. They lose touch with their own inner authority because they've projected it entirely onto the inflated leader. This creates a codependent system where the follower's diminishment fuels the leader's expansion. Your help cannot reach an inflated person because they believe they're beyond needing help. They're the ones who help others. They're the enlightened ones guiding the ignorant. Any suggestion they need assistance is taken as your inability to recognize their elevated state. Jung warned that inflated individuals eventually collapse under the psychic tension of identifying their small ego with massive archetypal energies. The persona cannot hold the archetype's weight forever. But before this collapse, they often inflict severe damage on their followers. Jung recorded spiritual teachers who exploited students sexually while claiming it was sacred initiation. Business leaders who ruined employees' lives while believing they served a higher cause. Parents who psychologically harmed their children while convinced they were offering superior guidance. Their inflation blinded them to the harm they caused because they identified with the archetype's light while remaining unconscious of its shadow. When the collapse finally arrives, it is often dramatic. The savior is revealed as the one who needed saving. The guru is revealed as profoundly unenlightened. The judge is exposed as guilty of the very faults they condemned in others. Jung noted that inflated individuals often interpret their collapse as victimhood, as though they're being attacked by dark forces instead of confronting the natural consequences of their own inflation. They gain nothing from the downfall because they still lack genuine self-reflection. Your role is not to save them from collapsing. Only they can face the psychological pressure created by their inflation. Your responsibility is to maintain your integrity by refusing to be recruited into their orbit. Do not fuel their inflation through admiration or obedience. That is the only real form of help available. And it isn't truly help for them, it's protection for you. The final type Jung identified may appear less threatening than the others, but understanding them is essential because they are the ones most likely to manipulate your compassion. These are the unintegrated empaths. Highly sensitive people who naturally absorb emotional shock but have not integrated their shadow. More specifically, they haven't integrated their intelligence, their strength, or their right to set boundaries. These individuals notice everything. They perceive the wounds of others with striking clarity. They sense dysfunction before it becomes visible. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore, yet they haven't learned to use this gift strategically. Instead, they have been conditioned to believe their sensitivity is a flaw, that their perceptions are wrong and their needs unimportant. Here's how to identify them. They take responsibility for everything. They apologize simply for existing. They can describe the exact issue in a relationship or system, yet feel powerless to act on what they see. They fear being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Society has convinced them that their gift is a curse. They've been gaslit for so long that they no longer trust their extremely accurate perceptions. Jung studied these individuals closely because he recognized in them substantial unrealized potential. These were not damaged people. They were powerful individuals systematically trained to distrust their own power. Their sensitivity wasn't dysfunction. It was advanced data collection. They could read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, detect dishonesty, and feel the psychological climate of any room. But they'd learned to silence these perceptions rather than trust them. Here is where helping becomes enabling. Your role is not to resolve their problems for them. Your support should come through validation and empowerment. Affirm that their sensitivity is their strength. Confirm that their perceptions are data, not delusion. Help them realize that their gift is information gathering, not absorbing everyone's pain. They do not have to carry the emotional weight of others. They can observe, understand, and choose when to engage. But you cannot perform their shadow integration for them. They must reach their clarity event. That moment when their pattern recognition finally overrides their need to idealize others. That instant when they stop quieting themselves and begin trusting their perceptions completely. This transformation cannot be rushed or externally created. It must arise from internal psychological necessity. Jung described this clarity event in his case studies. It often came through betrayal. The empath would be hurt so profoundly by someone they had protected and enabled that their entire psychological structure shifted in one explosive moment. The person they had defended would cross a line that couldn't be reversed. And suddenly the observations they had been suppressing would surge into consciousness with overwhelming clarity. What follows the clarity event? Jung observed a transformation both striking and terrifying. The empath's shadow integration began. They reclaimed their intelligence, recognizing their perceptions had been accurate from the start. They reclaimed their strength, enforcing boundaries they had never permitted themselves before. They reclaimed their right to protect themselves, withdrawing energy from people and situations that drained them. The transformed empath became what Jung termed selectively empathetic. They did not lose their sensitivity. They gained discernment. They could still feel deeply, but they consciously chose what deserved their energy. They became immune to manipulation because they could see it far ahead. They became psychologically dangerous to predators because their gift could no longer be exploited. Jung recounted one patient whose transformation demonstrated this perfectly. She had spent 15 years in a marriage where her husband's alcoholism and infidelity were framed as her failure to be supportive enough. She sensed every lie, felt every betrayal, and knew exactly what was happening. But she'd been conditioned to distrust her perception, blame herself, and try harder. The clarity event occurred when she discovered he'd been stealing from their children's college fund to support his affair. Something snapped, or, more accurately, something finally integrated. Within 6 months, she had left the marriage, built firm boundaries, and begun rebuilding her life. Her sensitivity remained, but she no longer used it to enable his dysfunction. She used it to protect herself and her children. When you save unintegrated empaths from situations they must escape on their own, you delay this vital integration. When you fight their battles, you block them from discovering their own strength. When you reinforce their victim narrative instead of their power, you trap them in the very pattern they need to outgrow. Jung was explicit about this. The helper who keeps rescuing the empath is preventing the empath's awakening. What does healthy support look like for the unintegrated empath? Reflect their strength, not their victimization. When they describe someone's harmful behavior, don't focus on how awful the other person is. Focus on asking why they are choosing to stay. When they express their accurate perceptions, validate them instead of helping them rationalize or explain them away. When they voice fear about being too sensitive, reframe sensitivity as a tool for gathering intelligence, guiding them toward their power rather than their pain. Ultimately, however, they must choose their own integration. You cannot force it. You cannot rescue them into it. The clarity event will occur in its own time, and they must navigate their shadow integration independently. Your responsibility is to avoid obstructing that process through misguided assistance. Here's what Jung observed about all 6 of these dangerous types. The moment you stop enabling them, you compel them to confront the psychological tension necessary for their growth. This is not cruelty. It is the only genuine form of compassion available. True compassion isn't about alleviating another person's suffering. It is about respecting their sovereignty and honoring their need to face their own challenges. Jung documented something remarkable about helpers who finally learned to withdraw their energy from these 6 types. They didn't become cold or detached. They became what Jung termed selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but strategically protective about where their care is invested. They discovered that the highest service is not sacrificing yourself for people who do not wish to be saved. It is protecting your own light so it can illuminate effectively, rather than being drained into psychological voids. Consider each type once more. The chronically lazy require consequences, not cushions. The repetition addicts need therapeutic intervention, not another participant in their drama. Persona perfectionists need to face their cracks, not receive more praise for their mask. Shadow projectors require space, not your attempts at correction. Inflated prophets must experience collapse, not attract additional followers. Unintegrated empaths need empowerment, not rescue. Your help, no matter how well-intentioned, often prevents the very transformation these individuals need. Your greatest contribution isn't saving everyone who seems to need it. It is cultivating the wisdom to distinguish between those who genuinely seek transformation and those who seek enablers for their patterns. Most people don't truly want change. They want their pain to ease while their dysfunctional patterns continue. Your compassionate intervention frequently permits exactly that. You lower their pain below the threshold necessary for change, allowing dysfunction to persist. Here's the final insight. The 6 types Jung identified are not your responsibility to fix. They are your responsibility to recognize and strategically avoid, not from judgment or superiority, but from psychological wisdom about how genuine transformation occurs. People change when the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. Your help often diminishes the necessary pain below that threshold. Step away from the chronically lazy. Refuse roles in repetition dramas. Cease affirming perfect personas. Withdraw from shadow projectors. Do not follow inflated prophets. Empower, but do not rescue, unintegrated empaths. This is not abandonment. It is the highest form of respect. You honor their ability to confront their own psychological work while protecting your energy for those who truly desire transformation. Which of these 6 types do you need to stop helping? Share in the comments below. And if this video clarified Jung's radical approach to compassion for you, subscribe for more insights into psychology that challenge conventional thinking about helping others. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.